Good morning and welcome to our Cultural Center Feasibility Task Force meeting. It's morning, so that's going to be a challenge. For today, June 27th, 2024, and we welcome our online folks, Mitchell and Natalia and Lisa. We see you and hopefully you can hear. Give us a wave if you can hear. Good, thumbs up, perfect. Thank you very much. So we'll call this meeting to order, and if we can please take a look at the agenda. If there's any changes or comments about the agenda, if you want to put them on the table right now. Otherwise, seeing none, can I have someone put the agenda forward? Councillor Richardson, thank you very much. And a seconder, Christina, thank you very much. And all in favor, and that carries. Thank you very much. So the agenda is in place. Pardon me. Declaration of pecuniary interest, asking if there is any declarations, and seeing none. Thank you very much. Number 4, adoption of the minutes from our last meeting on March the 27th. Those meetings have been circulated so that you can all look at them. If there's no comments, changes, can I have somebody put that on the table for approval and acceptance, the minutes? Thank you very much, Lori. And may I have a seconder? Pat, thank you very much. All those in favor of accepting the minutes, and that carries. Thank you very much. I love it when we whiz through stuff like this. Deputations, I gather we have no deputations today. Or correspondence? No correspondence, thank you. So in the world of new business, first thing on the agenda, 7.1, presentation on the Green Municipal Fund by Manager Rebecca Mustard. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here with you. Today, I wanted to bring an update on the Green Municipal Fund to you. So here we, perhaps. Yes, here we go. So just to put into context of where we are again, we're in phase 2 of this process of a cultural centre, and this entire body of work that we're talking about is phase 2 feasibility. In this feasibility stage, as we talked about last meeting, we're dealing with site exploration, selection, and feasibility analysis. And there is a set of tasks for our consulting team who are online with us today to complete, and a set of tasks for you as a task force. The recommendations from this task force will inform Council's decision for moving the cultural centre forward from phase 2 into phase 3. And so we had a project timeline that we were talking about last time, and I want to bring this to your attention because the Green Municipal Fund feeds into this work, and I want you to understand where we are in the context of this entire project. So we looked at this slide very similar last time we were together with the different meetings this task force has held. And today we are in June taking a look at the next agenda item at the interim report, which is pulling the findings together of all of the work that's been done to date. And then what comes next, when I've figured out this mouse, there we go. At our last gathering of you as the task force, there was a discussion that in addition to today's meeting in June, you'd take the summer to take a look at this report, dive into it, come back in September to talk about the report, start formulating your recommendations for Council, and then present those recommendations to Council in November so that Council has the recommendations of this task force for their 2025 budget deliberations. So the Green Municipal Fund, some of you will be very familiar with it, some of you not so much. It was a fund that is a federal government fund. It's coordinated through FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. It was established in 2020 and it supports municipalities. It's run a number of different projects, but the real focus is on environmental sustainability. And the projects that they fund are around reducing energy consumption, GHG emissions, improving water qualities, cleaner ways to travel, restoring of contaminated sites. And by doing that, they also have an emphasis on how is this project creating local jobs, attracting local investments, improving that quality of living and the quality of health. So these projects that are funded, my apologies, are funded at various stages of a project's life cycle. So they're loans and grants, and they fund plans, feasibility studies, pilot projects, capital projects. We here are doing a feasibility study. We applied for a feasibility study grant back, as you might recall, one of the very first task force meetings. We mentioned that we were applying to this fund. And the feasibility study intent is to look at the technical feasibility of whatever the project is, so that when you get to the construction phase of a project, you would be able to meet their environmental standards. And that's what you're testing in this stage. So, this project application, funding application, was put forward late last year. The funding, as it was put in, was to expand both the scope and the depth of this work to explore the feasibility of this cultural centre being designed, constructed, built and operated using net zero, to look at environmentally sustainable building. This grant fund is up to 50% of a grant. This project, as you know, is a $100,000 project. So we applied with Council's direction for a overall $200,000 project, taking Council's $100,000, seeking $100,000 from the Green Municipal Fund. The goal around this at that point in time, as we discussed, was really a number of different things, but two that I want to highlight for you. One of them is you are bringing forward recommendations to Council around the scope of this task force. As Council starts looking at the design, build, construction, and how this will roll out in future phases, we want them to have some really good information for decision making around when we actually talk about how we're going to design, how we're going to build it. Is it feasible to go to net zero? How far can Council go with their investment so they know what they're getting into, and not just for potentially building a centre, but would this cultural centre be able to hit those targets? An informed Council decision. The second really focal point for this was, from what we have been hearing from these funders, is that to fund a construction project later on, it is really important to start going through this process of project design with these funders early on in the stage. Hence, we're in a feasibility stage. We're entering into their program at this point in time with the intent that heading down, when we get into the next phase and the following phase, which is construction, the door is open for Green Municipal Fund to be a contributing funder to this cultural centre project. So we wanted to bring this to you as a task force today because we have just heard from Green Municipal Fund that this project has been approved. This project can start, it can go forward. Last week, Council approved the signing of the documents to enter into an agreement with the Green Municipal Fund. We are yet to receive those funding agreements. So this is a very preliminary conversation that we wanted to have with you to let you know that this work is coming forward. It is not at a point in time of public announcements. We can share it in this context, but this is the context that we can share it in. There's a lot more work that needs to be done, and primarily that the funder is the first one that gets to announce when projects have received funding. But for you as a task force that is overseeing this work, a huge part of this work, you need to know about this. So FYI, the funds have been are coming, the funding has been received. This is good news for this project. We are yet to receive the funding agreements, which includes all the details of that fund. So we're only speaking very high level today. And what this means for this project is we really are hoping to start this work in July. That's depending on when that paperwork comes through. And continue this work probably past the end of November. And this work will continue. But this work does not need to slow down the work of this task force in bringing recommendations forward to Council for that budget process. Again, it's very technical. It is work that will happen complementary to the recommendations that you're putting forward, and it's specific to the technical side of achieving net zero in any construction design work going forward. So do know that as a task force, you are heading council or prepping council to get towards this decision around moving from phase 2 feasibility into phase 3 site selection and design. And the recommendations that we're hoping council will be able to discuss will be in November prior to their budget deliberations, which will come shortly after that. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Rebecca about that, Pat?
My question is this the only funding source that is being pursued currently?
Want to jump into that? No. It is the outcome of one funding source. So this project itself for phase 2, yes, it was the council's $100,000 plus this $100,000 specific to phase 2. When we get into future phases, and I hope this is part of your conversation today as a task force, there will be numerous other funding streams and revenue opportunities to fund later phases of this work. But for specific to phase 2, council's contribution of $100,000 or the community's contribution via way of council, and then this Green Municipal Fund.
If we're successful in getting this funding, does that help or hinder us in our pursuit with other funding sources?
Great question. This program itself, the Green Municipal Fund, is designed to be a stackable program. So going forward into future phases, there will need to be an updated application for each new phase of this project to the Green Municipal Fund. But it doesn't hinder it at all. In fact, it probably helps funding because you've got a federal check mark. Yes, great way to say it.
And one more question. The governance model, which we're addressing in the report that we received earlier this week, gives us several options for how we might proceed. Is this application very specific to one type of governance model?
Another great question. Not at all. In fact, this application is completely neutral to the governance model. This application allows for the project to take a look at, is it possible to conduct net zero design and construction and operation of the facility? So it does not go into governance, it does not go into funding, it doesn't go into what should or should not be in the facility. None of that is touched by this funding. This funding purely allows for this project to go one step deeper into, is net zero, can net zero be achieved? If it does, what are the implications of achieving net zero going forward as one small component of a much larger, very fulsome project?
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Tim?
Being that this is a stackable grant, when would phase 3 or phase 4 be able to be applied for, given that a green building grant and a change of federal government might conflict with each other? Is there an ability to get those applications in, or is there ability to speed the process to take advantage of it while it still exists?
That's a very great question as well. I can say that as soon as we get the paperwork, we will finalize a program plan for what this looks like and how quickly that work can be done so that it can be done swiftly but thoroughly to be able to get a report at the end. We do have with the Green Municipal Fund, and Donna has been working very closely with a contact from FCM. And so FCM historically, at least from what we have seen, has done a really great job of tracking with their projects. When they're investing early in a municipal project, they are very keen to see the outcome of a municipal project being a green building. So I think we've got some good partners at Green Municipal Fund to work with us to get this project done well, thoroughly, in a timely manner to be able to move on to the next step. So who knows what's going to happen with different governments, but we'll do all we can on our end to keep it moving.
Thank you. Those were some great questions, actually. Very, very good. So any other questions for Rebecca before we finish this? Councillor Richardson.
Maybe just to make a comment, regarding this whole program as well, we're always opening those doors and turning those pages for opportunities when it comes to resources, and we are doing our homework behind the scenes as well, because it's not just one and done, so.
Thank you. And I know we'll be kept up to date on whatever happens, like receiving paperwork and whatnot, just like we're being told about this now. So that's great. Thank you very much for keeping us up to speed. Appreciate it. All right. So that's good news. Pardon me. And that brings us to 7.2, which I think is pretty exciting. And this is our interim report presentation. So welcome everybody. Mitchell May from JAMO Architecture and Natalia Holetska from Nordicity Consulting. And folks, I will turn it all over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen.
We've got Peter in the room too.
Oh, sorry. Welcome. Sorry, I didn't see you there.
No worries.
Okay, so I'll send it over to you, and however you'd like to start, just go right ahead. Sorry, we seem to have a momentary technical difficulty. We're just trying to get your screen up here.
I think it is.
All right, here we go.
Good.
Success. Thank you.
Great. So I'll let Natalia start with the first section of the report, and then I'll jump in on the back end of that. So Natalia, just let me know when you want me to change the slide.
Yeah, for sure. We can stay here for now, but yep. Hi, everyone. So nice to see you all again. I hope you've had a great start to the summer so far. Everybody looks a little bit more sun-kissed today. And I hope you've all had a chance, of course, to look over the first draft of the report. So, of course, we want to spend most of the meeting answering your questions on that and getting feedback on it. But we just wanted to start off by adding some context to what was shared to preempt any of those questions. Next slide, please. So yeah, this first draft report, it reflects the research, data collection, and analysis that was undertaken until we last met, when we started collating all of the research that we pulled together. And so we dug into quite some detail, Nordicity specifically on the space programming and the modeling. But we kept the governance pieces and fundraising recommendations more high level at this point, as we nail down the scope of the facility in this next round of edits. So we'll include some more catered recommendations in the next draft of the report, which we're expecting to complete by the end of July here. And Mitchell will be able to comment more on the site selection pieces later on at the end of the presentation.
I shared the wrong screen, so just let me grab the correct report. I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
Looks like we're here twice.
Sorry, folks, we're just experiencing some sort of sound challenges at this end, and we're just asking a question here about the sound.
No problem.
Tracy? Yeah, we're just wondering if maybe it's to do with unused microphones being on, whether that's causing the challenge with the sound here. But it sounds like you're very much in a big, huge, echoey bubble right at the moment. So, but we'll
Uh-oh.
we'll proceed and see what happens here. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Oh, look, Donna's taking care of it for us. Thank you. Here we go.
Perfect. Great. Okay, thanks. Everyone can hear us? We're all good?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Great. Okay, so collectively, we undertook a lot of research and analysis in this next phase to validate and add to what was developed in phase one. And even before a formal phase one happened, we know that there was a lot of research and consultation done within the community itself to get to this point today. So this is a long time coming, we want to preempt, but we undertook the activities on the screen today. We separated out needs by different sector stakeholders and prioritized them based on the urgency of the need, the fiscal viability, and the ease of implementation, which kind of led to that new kind of programming design. Next slide, please. Some key themes that Nordicity was able to pull from this research and analysis included that there's a strong sense of enthusiasm and a sense of urgency from this project from the community. So people are really looking at it with a sense of optimism and pride and really want to see it happen in the near future. I know that sentiment is shared around the table today. We found the center's vision is evolving in the public to be a bit more community arts focused, to enable the growth of the new artist community and create a place where they can gather, network, and develop their practices, as well as allow for various artisans and just general arts interested community members to engage with it in different ways. So key needs and goals are described in that second bullet on this slide here. Our analysis also found that the addressable market is about 250,000 folks, both in Kawartha Lakes and surrounding neighborhoods, which have certain facility gaps that might be met by some of the spaces that are being proposed. And at the same time, it goes without saying how challenging the economy is at the moment, which is maybe dampen some of the sponsorship and fundraising potential. However, economic challenges are cyclical. So as mentioned, we'll add some more detail to those recommendations at this next draft as we get your feedback. But I'd also love to hear some feedback from those members of the task force with expertise here. But I won't belabor the research results all that much because they're in the document and I'm sure you've seen it. But it just gives you a sense of what we're working with when we developed the updated programming table, which I'll ask Mitchell to change slides for. So yeah, based on all of that, this is kind of where we landed at this point, based on everything we heard, all the research that was completed and the prioritization that we did. I should mention that the city considers the must-have and should-have categories to be the full scope of the center moving forward. But as we are still in these feasibility phases, we're going to keep these headings. When you go to council, you'll probably just want to remove them and have one slate of programming to bring forward. I also want to clarify that nothing is set in stone at this point. We do still have one more round of edits on this particular piece of things. And I'm sure as this process keeps going, until you have a site purchased and an architect and developer engaged to draw things out, things will probably be flexible. But that being said, at the end of this process, we hope to have most of these details nailed down and have it as accurately as possible reflect the needs coming from the community. So we'll just go over what changed in this model and why. So we no longer have those two separate size proposals, although they look very similar. We just merged everything together. We were never really considering them separate to begin with. But for shared exhibition space, we separated out the rehearsal space because we heard from you all and others that there was a need for additional accessible rehearsal space that can be used when places like the Academy Theatre and other spaces that offer rehearsal space are in use. There are also a number of artists and arts groups in the community who would love to animate some shared exhibition spaces, but not run these spaces full time, which is why we recommend merging some of these spaces with public areas and having multiple spaces to allow different groups to use them at the same time. The art gallery was demoted just based on an earlier discussion we had with the Kawartha Lakes Art Gallery in the winter, where they shared that they had an opportunity to move into a more permanent space. They were thinking that was going to happen before the center would be built. So they weren't really sure that by the time the center was built, their need would still exist. But they were very interested in still that kind of hub and spoke idea that they could maybe offer satellite programming and animate kind of the shared exhibition spaces at that time. However, since then, we've learned that while they do still plan to move into a more stable permanent space in the interim, the property owner is willing to release them from their lease if a new center was to be built with the appropriate amenities for them to occupy. So it would be good to discuss the logistics there with them. And a good next step for the city would be to secure agreements perhaps with potential anchor tenants like the Kawartha Art Gallery to reduce the risk of any of these spaces when they're being built sitting empty. We also slightly raised the square footage for the office spaces, and we stipulated the range of spaces that we recommend including, because we heard there were quite diverse needs here. Some people are looking for larger meeting rooms that can accommodate 80 plus people. Of course, some spaces might have to be occupied by the facility's staff, and others can be occupied by an anchor tenant or a long-term leaser who could just set up their practice in that space and offer a more stable source of income. So we heard things like perhaps therapists might want to set up, make it a quiet room, a quiet space. It kind of fits in with the whole arts culture portfolio. Another space that was moved up was the cafe and restaurant. So we think that's a very important way that people connect in the post and even a pre-pandemic world. Having a cafe and restaurant that can be leased out to a longer term tenant provides a somewhat more stable source of income, firstly. And secondly, it would invite everyday people into the center to explore it. So it can help attract youth and that young to middle-aged crowd and beyond that, who may not necessarily be interested in the arts, but while they're there, they might be intrigued to explore further, maybe walk through those public spaces with public exhibitions, take a look at the programming that's happening in the center, and even sign up. So in that way, it can be an important marketing tool, an important way to get people in the door. So that's why that moved up there. Specialized artisan and other maker studios have been placed in should have now. And it can be considered a bucket under artist studios there, which I'll dig into. Actually, let me start with that. Artist studios were added because, of course, we heard that there's this growing artist community that's looking to connect and create together. So we often heard that the local arts community feels like they're lacking a bit of a home base to connect and create in and to go to find out what's happening in Kawartha Lakes in that area. So that's why we suggest bringing in some artist studios. And the specialized maker and artisan creator spaces can be considered a bucket under that. But as we heard on our tour in the Oakville facility, these spaces can be quite costly to run and operate, quite time consuming. So without buy-in at this time, like permanent buy-in that, somebody's going to occupy these spaces full-time or on a more full-time basis, they're in should have at the moment. But again, that maybe discussions can be had with the Kawartha Potters Guild, who are definitely interested in offering more local programming. They're getting some demand from the Kawartha Lakes community to offer programming in Kawartha Lakes instead of their current facility in Peterborough as well. So I think opportunities exist there. And in terms of the digital side of things, Pingwa is currently considering adding digital makerspaces. I don't think considering, I think they will be adding digital makerspaces to their new development. So some of those needs might be met elsewhere, but any room, so long as it has sufficient electrical power and outlets, can be converted into a digital makerspace if the appropriate equipment is acquired. So there is that flexibility in all of this. That's why I mean to say nothing is set in stone, and we can look at this pretty openly. And of course, flexibility and adaptability is one of the key design principles we think that the center should keep in mind. And then we kept the Black Box Theater and Performance Hall on there. I think that was included in the large size option. We found in our market research that this is a gap in the market area. And we also heard from you guys and other folks that we connected with that that would be a need for a space that can host, 100-person crowds. But we'd love to hear, of course, from you guys if that makes any sense. And then another piece that was promoted was the commercial kitchen, just because if you want the facility to be able to also enable like weddings or larger scale corporate events, let's say, that can be pretty important, having a place for caterers to store their materials and prepare food. And it also aligns with the culinary strategy that the City of Kawartha Lakes has. We also had some interest in the survey. We heard that one person put their hand up to offer programming out of a new commercial kitchen. So that could possibly be followed up on as well. But those were the main changes to this model here. And we can dig in. I'm just going to pass it over to Mitchell first to talk about site selection and where we've got there. But yeah, looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Natalia.
Natalia, just before we move forward, we have a question here. Can we just share that with you?
Sure. Yeah.
Laurie?
Thank you. Would there be value in separating the sort of spaces for the archive versus the spaces for the rest of the center? I'm sort of really posing it to the other task force members. Because as I look at this list, even just color coding it for me, I just want to make sure that I'm paying attention to the archive needs as well and not miss any critical space requirements. Yeah?
That's a good question. Any thoughts, Pat?
Yeah, I, as well, in reviewing this document, took a hard look at the 15 to 20,000 square feet allocated for archive. That's 50% of what you're calling the must-haves. Is this the must-have because this is replacing the current archival space required by the city of Kawartha Lakes?
I believe that is the intention. It's still to be confirmed in this next round of edits, but this was, yes, direction from it didn't change from phase one, just carried over based on the needs, of the city at that time, and also for storage space for heritage organizations and any other groups that are needing space to house their archival collections. I think that's the mix.
Thank you, Pat.
Yeah, like Laurie, I would like to see that separated from the rest of the facility plan. There's no need for it to be in the same building. It's a current activity by the city that they're required to do. When the Kawartha Lakes Arts Council initiated the feasibility study, the archive was not included in that request. And it was added in before the feasibility study started in phase one. And I can't help but think that it was put in there to replace something that the city already had a responsibility to do, not to address what the city's not taking care of with our arts and cultural community.
Laurie?
Sorry, can I offer a little clarification? I just meant in the report, I want to separate out the spaces for the archive versus the spaces for the sort of artistic programming, because I'm having a hard time doing what you did so quickly. What percentage is dedicated to the archive? In terms of, so I wasn't suggesting that the archive is a separate building. What I have seen in my participation is that the archive is almost exactly the opposite of what an artistic group is. It doesn't require heavy parking. The other one does. So I think there's value in that discussion. Thank you.
Yes, Christina.
I just want to support that. I would even like to see it maybe even go a little bit further in the sense that there's just the public artistic spaces are in, kind of the way you have it set up on the screen in the blocks. The staffing and administration in another block, and then the archive in another block, or maybe those two are together. But I think that's, I would agree in the sense that they're different strategies with it, different components to it, and different thoughts that kind of have to go into all of it when we're thinking about it. And the archive is really static, and the other space is more dynamic, and there's going to be a lot of activity. And I think it'll just help to kind of, when thinking about our governance and all of those things that have to go into it, really focusing on the activation and the different components that will have to go into that public space and keeping that separated.
Thank you. Darcy?
I also think maybe clarification on things like shared exhibition space, public space versus educational space versus artist studios versus art gallery, because all of those terms can mean the same thing. And so, like, what is a definition of those spaces and those terms to then what you were saying earlier? What does all that include, and how does that work programming wise, and how those spaces will be activated?
Very good. I think this is wonderful. This is actually, even just in this one chart, brought us a whole bunch of different things that are really significant to think about. And I certainly myself agree that being able to separate visually the different components, the archival part of it and the other, would help me sort of process it visually. At the same time, when I look at this, I see a lot of the things that the community has asked for, certainly in this survey and whatnot. I do see overlap between spaces here that I think could be there would be a rationale for an efficiency aspect. Things like the what's up there as rehearsal recreation space and the black box theater. Those kinds of things cover much of the same businesses, activities, and as such, maybe there's, for efficiency purposes and making the most of what we can, maybe combining those kinds of things. So there's a lot to look at here. I guess my point is this. I think there's, for us as a group, a lot of potential discussion that could be had to pass back to them. Sorry, Christina?
I'd just like to get some clarity at some point. There's, discussions about usage for things like weddings and talking about the use of the commercial kitchen and catering, but I'm concerned a little bit about the amount of square feet that are allocated for spaces to do that. I'm thinking about, I'm not in that sector, but a 3,000 square foot house, and how much space that would allow for something like a wedding. I'm not really sure that the exhibition space would give that amount of space needed. So is there some, can we talk a little bit about that within the report, about the types of events that would bring in the revenue and how much space might be needed for that? So I think that's going to impact our ability to bring funds in to support this.
Thank you. Are there any other thoughts, before I pass it back to Natalia, because I'm sure they have a whole lot more. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you. Maybe just one comment too. And I think even, when reviewing this, we just need to remember that we are being prudent and have to recognize that we do have some city needs as well as those community needs, and it's finding that balance. And the discussion around the table right now is going to really make it, I think, explore it a little bit further. So it's a good discussion, like you said. Thank you.
All right, well, let's pass it back to Natalia. She's heard all sorts of stuff now, but we'll send it back to you and
No, this
is
awesome. Thank you so much for all of that. We'll give it some thought to how to make it kind of concise and readable at the same time. Take your point about kind of describing what each space means. We did dig in the subsections of section 3 a bit more about the kind of what we're thinking those uses could be. But I think, to have like a kind of condensed version that you guys can use and of course go to council with, we can work on that for sure. But that's the end of my spiel here. I'll pass it off to Mitchell.
Yeah, thanks, Natalia. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay. So I'll pick up kind of where we left at the last presentation. So this is kind of starting to look at site selection. And so the conclusion of the last presentation was that the most ideal location was within the urban settlement area of Lindsay. And as you saw, that was based on, within the report, review of prior planning done over the years for the city. So that includes things like the growth management plan, the official plan, the secondary plan for Lindsay, the transportation master plan, the heritage master plan, cultural master plan, and among others. And so following that was the workshop. Today, I'm just going to go over a quick recap of the responses we received. We actually received relatively few responses, so we've included more of a what we heard section. So just to remind you, the first question in that workshop was was based on the desired site selection criteria. So from top to bottom, these were curb appeal, contextual design, scale and massing, conservation and enhancement of cultural heritage resources, the longest one, and distinctive identity. And so the feedback we received from the task force ranged. So for curb appeal, some believe that the center should be a landmark and value curb appeal, while others think a contemporary and sustainable design is more important. For contextual design, it was found that it was important to utilize materials that reflect the city of Kawartha Lakes, and there was a lot of discussion about this, and celebrate the local landscape in the design of the center. And there was also, and this was mentioned a few times in different responses, the importance of Indigenous heritage and nature to the city, and also the importance of consulting with the Indigenous community, which is planned for the site selection phase and as part of the GMF project as well, Green Municipal Fund. The next item was scale and massing. So the center should be designed with future growth and expansion in mind, but also fit comfortably within the context and not be overwhelming. For the conservation and enhancement of cultural heritage resources, Indigenous heritage, again, and how it impacts the design and composition of the center should be considered, which again will form part of that next step. Potentially reusing an existing building could highlight the architecture of the region and act as a tool for storytelling. Therefore, reuse of an existing building could be a significant factor as long as it does not jeopardize the program requirements of the center, which agreed. Distinctive identity, connection to the water and agriculture form part of the city's identity. And again, there was a lot of discussion about this. And input from the local indigenous community is required. The next question was related to emerging site types and the 5 building types that emerged. So these include religious buildings, parking lots and vacant land, Main Street redevelopment, new development areas, and the educational campus. And so the feedback we received here for religious buildings was considering an existing building as a site is dependent on the building size, parking, location. And specifically connecting the downtown business core to the newer, rapidly developing residential areas was a preference that was expressed. The site should also allow for future expansion, which is a factor definitely in the site selection as well, just to make that clear. Some also hinted at potential benefits of reusing a structure like a church, including acoustic qualities and conserving history and architecture. For the parking lots and vacant land type, while members were concerned about potentially reducing the number of existing parking spaces within the city, they also noted the opportunity to animate these spaces and create a destination within the existing infrastructure. For Main Street redevelopment, further animating the Main Street and utilizing existing services would be desired if a large enough lot can be sourced and enough parking spaces are provided. This location is advantageous because of partnership potential. The Academy Theatre was specifically mentioned, and other city programming such as car shows and farmers markets. Some view the center as an opportunity to develop other parts of the city of Kawartha Lakes in anticipation of future growth. New residential development areas. Some felt this option might be suitable depending on location and project timeline. Additionally, the site should be accessible by car and transit, and this option can provide the necessary gathering, community, and retail spaces needed for a new development and allow future expansion. The educational campus, which had quite a bit of discussion, was felt to be advantageous for its access to parking as well as a transit hub, which are already on site. And there are many opportunities for programming partnerships with the college, including the Gwen Crombie Theatre. Members noted its distance from the core might deter some visitors and might be overall less accessible. Although the Lindsay Recreation Complex and senior homes could increase attendance. It was also noted that this location provides opportunity to expand access to existing infrastructure and outdoor space. And so these responses are all going to be included in the report and will form part of the decision-making process as we refine the site selection. The other important aspect that was in the updated report, and I'll go over quickly so we have enough time for a fulsome discussion at the end, is we did a comparative architectural analysis of similar scaled facilities in somewhat similar community sizes, where as much as we could, and that was building on some analysis that Natalia had done in terms of the kind of operational model and financial model and kind of operating overall model of these facilities. So these kind of serve to validate some of the decisions for the ground floor related programming of the building, which you probably saw in the report and I talked about in the workshop as well. This analysis was included as an appendix, so I'm just going to go through it relatively quickly. But so we're looking at the Greater Vernon Cultural Center in BC, the Alton Mill Arts Center in Caledon, and the Altiuk Arts Center in Sydney, Nova Scotia. So I won't go through everything. They're roughly comparable, either municipal populations or regional populations. So Caledon is kind of in the GTA, so kind of has a little bit larger kind of regional population. But looking at the kind of key takeaways, there were like relative locations of things within the building that, again, we used to validate the ground floor programming. But I'll go through a few key programs. So the cafe is one interesting space in that there's a range of approaches. Vernon doesn't have it at all, as it's one block from the main street of the city. Alton Mill's closed, but they're currently pursuing a fully licensed restaurant, which almost seems somewhat essential to kind of continuing that center continuing to operate. And that I think that's likely due to the relative distance to other food and beverage. It's somewhat isolated off to the side in a relatively small community. And Altiuk has a cafe that also serves as a tenant space. So they have the city's Meals on Wheels program operating the cafe, and the associated, like it also operates from the commercial kitchen. And that commercial kitchen also serves the event spaces as well. So the proposed Kawartha Lake facility would be unique among these three centers, although we did look at others in the appendix, just not included in this presentation, including the Peel Art Gallery Archives that contain an archive and research room. So not unheard of to keep them together. Parking is also approached in a number of ways. So each of these three has fairly limited parking, with about 20 to 25 spaces for Vernon and Alton, and only 6 for the Altiuk Art Center, as most of these rely on surrounding parking. As for other spaces within the facility, there's a few more ranges of approaches. So as I mentioned, the commercial kitchen approach differs based on the needs of the centers. So Vernon has no needs since it's in close proximity to downtown, and they don't have kind of an associated program. Alton Mills is installing a commercial kitchen as part of the restaurant, which will serve the event spaces and that restaurant. And Altiuk has one to serve the Meals on Wheels, the cafe, and events in the building. I've also just quickly included some photos, which will make their way into the next round of the report, but I'll go through them quickly just to give you a sense of how the centers work. So this is the Greater Vernon Cultural Center. You can see the lobby and public spaces kind of connect with the square outside, which is kind of an animated space intended for art installations. Theater lobby up on the second floor, accessed by a kind of wide stair. Art gallery beyond, and another kind of art space that is kind of within that lobby, a bit less climatically controlled. So just a quick section here to see. There's the social stair kind of leading to that theater lobby. So the theater is actually on the upper floor, which is an anomaly for the buildings that we analyzed. The Alton Mill Art Center is a reused mill that was in disrepair, very similar to the Gibson Center in terms of its architectural qualities. It has kind of that flexibility of space where it's a post and beam building that can kind of be reorganized, which is nice and adds flexibility. And you can see that in that they are kind of removing some spaces, adding a restaurant in, the cafes become something else, and it just kind of allows the space to change with the needs as it evolves. And finally, the LTF Art Center is a converted monastery nunnery in Sydney. So it's been renovated quite significantly. Grade has been dropped down. The cafe is actually on the second floor, again an anomaly, but I think because it has such a nice patio, it makes sense. And then looking at the different levels, so these were described in the architectural analysis, but basically level 1 is administration spaces in kind of the least public area of the building, with larger tenants. So basically it's like offices on the first floor. The second level, where they have the cafe, it's located with the kind of exhibition and public spaces. So this is sort of acts as the public floor with a commercial kitchen in the back. Level 3 has smaller spaces for artist studios, and the same with level 4. Like these are actually tenanted, and then like a larger kind of combined tenanted space. So with that, I think we can move on to questions and feedback, and hopefully get a good amount of discussion in on this.
Thanks very much, Mitchell. I think you'll get some good discussion. Here we go. Tim?
Hey, Mitchell, just going back a couple of slides there. Were you actually able ever to find an example of what we're considering building, which is where the archive and the archive research is sharing a roof space, airspace, all of those things with messy people who paint and theater people who use fog machines and hazers and that sort of stuff?
I was. There's the Peel. So there's the Peel Art Gallery and Archives. So that is a facility in Peel. It is converted. It's an adaptive reuse of a few buildings. So they're built as separate buildings on one site. The archive is within a separate building, but they are actually all connected underground. Like a fairly recent renovation made them into kind of one real continuous facility. It is relatively rare. Like that is the one example of a comparable size that we were able to find.
And in that case, it was an art gallery that was sharing with an archive.
It is a gallery. It also does have event space, and it has like it has relatively more limited artistic programming in that you can do some workshops there, but it's not an all-out arts center.
Okay. Thank you. This is shooting up red flags for me in that we don't have an example to look at where these two things have happily coexisted under a single roof. I once opened a theater at the base of the Calgary Tower. It didn't go terribly well every night when we turned on our hazers and set off the smoke detectors, and the Calgary Tower had to be evacuated every night as the hazers came on, and people had to walk down the stairs of the Calgary Tower. So I worry about it, just having seen those archives and seen how hermetically sealed they are and all of those things. I mean, we run an art gallery where we can't have paint nights because we can't have artwork that's hanging on a wall and people flinging paint at in the same place. And I worry that we're setting ourselves up for a place where we have two very conflicting interests happening in this place. And I'm not surprised, but I'm concerned by not seeing an example that we can point to of where this has worked together.
Thank you. And I would say that's the kind of information that you can provide, which is awesome. That's why you're here. That's because where do we find that? That's interesting. Any thoughts, Mitchell, did you come across anything that sort of combined that kind of situation?
At that particular scale, I have not. I'm just looking through the report to see if there's any like in our architectural analysis, we were looking at ones of the same scale, so it wasn't something that was present. It's included in the chart that way. That's the only one that kind of stands out. I'm just looking back to see if there's any other ones. Yeah, like I said, the Peel example is the only one that I have come across. Yeah.
I see Angela has her hand up. Just while you're looking around there, Mitchell. Angela?
Yes, I did want to mention that if the Archives and Record Center were to be in the same facility as something like an art gallery, there is paint, they would not be in the same space in a cultural center. It would be separated out. Archives and record centers where the records are require a enclosed HVAC system. So it wouldn't be occupying the same space with pottery and paints and things like that. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
to build on that. Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine, Mitchell. You go ahead.
Okay. Just to build on that, I think it would be a purpose-built facility, so that is a consideration that, like, anyone would take into account. The kind of how the archive would work within the larger facility. It could be just that we didn't find it at the same scale, and there's also there was actually one other example that we did see on our site tours, which was Oka, which I'd forgotten about. Also, just because it was a little bit larger of a building, so it very well may be that a larger scale facility typically will take that kind of function on, but a smaller facility might not have the kind of
Thanks. Thank
funds
you.
or something like that.
Peter, you had your hand up there?
Only to say the same things that were just said. I mean, architecturally, can't you can conceive of a division there somehow, which would actually be required, as Angela said, and Mitchell said could be done. So I was just going to say that I wouldn't be spooked by the fact that you have the same co-location, as long as it's not in the same room as the Messy with the archives.
All right. Thank you. Tim?
I get that, and I appreciate that these would be separated spaces with separated systems and all of that. My concern lies in that we are now looking at possibly suggesting that we purchase the most expensive downtown core real estate in the city of Kawartha Lakes to build this center. Are we really going to be suggesting that we are purchasing this same square footage for something that doesn't have that same requirement to be downtown, doesn't have that same requirement to build a streetscape, to rebuild a community, to do all of these other things that we're expecting this art center to do? I'm as a task force member, I'm having a very difficult time reconciling that half of the space, half of the budget, half of all of these things. But with the real estate factor now factored into this, are we actually suggesting that needs to be downtown on a main street? I can't square it. And we're 5 meetings in and I can't square it.
If I can just make a comment myself, I think since the beginning of this, the city has been on board as a partner that's been involved in this with that particular aspect of the project being incorporated. And so it's always been a part of the discussion and a part of sort of how this would be able to come to fruition, you know. So I can see both sides of the thing, but the practicality of it, I think, is having these two things existing together and functioning in their own worlds. I see the overlap when we talk about storage and archival space, because one of the things that was mentioned was that storage space would be accessible to, for instance, art gallery people for proper storage of artwork. So keeping that separate from the other archival stuff would involve, again, some kind of separation. So I see a lot of things. I'm thinking that these are a lot of things that we as a group need to sort of hash out and make some suggestions, specific suggestions. And when I say specific, I mean, sort of come to an agreement and be very specific and pass those along as a group. So I just put that out there. Pat?
I'll start by saying I was very pleased to receive this report. And for the most part, I fully agree with the direction it's going. I think there's some tweaking to do. Specifically dealing with the archive, we've come a long way into the process. It's included in the feasibility study. But at some point, we may have to think in terms of a divide and conquer and have two separate spreadsheets dealing with those items included in the project to the end. But we potentially may be talking about two buildings, two locations, and not necessarily one. So just putting that out there, I'm very pleased, and I think that we're at a transition point where we're starting to talk about real specifics rather than hypotheticals. Up till now, it's all been talking about hypothetically. And in that transition to not hypothetical properties, but start looking at real properties, I think we also need to re-engage the real partners, real participants, not hypothetical participants in this project in the long term, because the input from all of the real participants in the center is going to be necessary to really fine-tune this.
Thanks, Pat. Anyone else around the table have a question or a comment, or pass it back over to, sorry, Tim.
I'll keep going. The 10 validation interviews, who were they with?
I can get the full list, but we chatted with the Kawartha Art Gallery, the Kawartha Lakes Arts Council. We chatted with the various BIAs. So Lindsay, we got some virtual notes from a couple of them. We chatted with the Kawartha Potters Guild. Sorry, I should have put it in the appendix. I'll dig through my notes for it at the moment, but that's who's coming to mind at the moment, and a couple other folks as well.
Thank you. So I pass it back to you folks, Mitchell or Natalia, Peter.
I'd just love to hear any, fundraising recommendations or thoughts. I think that's kind of a bit of a gap we didn't get to hear from this group in the first few meetings. So if anyone has some thoughts there about what they'd like to see, what their thoughts are on what the potential is here for us to consider as we draft those recommendations, I'd love to hear it.
Okay. Just before we go there, just one question from me, thinking about site selection. And I mean, your report does a pretty good job at making clear the things that have to be parameters and what is likely a good spot and all that sort of stuff. And I think you did a great job of that. When it came down to it, though, and you're looking at all of this, and the focus has obviously come into Lindsay, and the focus has obviously sort of planted two different scenarios that are likely useful, one being the core area and one being probably the Fleming area, that kind of thing. Was there any specific spaces, specific property location that jumped out that made one more attractive than the other or potentially more useful? Just to get practical about this, is there something that did pop out?
I would say that, of course, we will be taking the kind of feedback we've received on those two areas into account. But looking at the two, I think that based on kind of the city's goals over the years and kind of the economic spin-off benefits that are intended for having a facility like this, I would say that, like, of those two, somewhere more in the downtown of Lindsay is more ideal. It also would serve as an attractor point for, like, the students who go to Fleming, like somewhere to go after class, bring them into the core. So it doesn't really lose out on it the same way it might if it's located on the Fleming campus. It becomes more of a destination that kind of will spill economic benefits, hopefully, into the vicinity. There are specific sites that we're looking at in those areas, but at this point, we're not ready to discuss like very specific sites.
Well enough. Good. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So to Natalia's question about the fundraising side of things, are there any questions or thoughts that you want to share with Natalia about that? Laurie?
Well, shouldn't we go over the operating budget first if we're going to talk about fundraising? I think it's section 3.
I think it's probably...
No, sorry, section 3.2.
I think it would be good. I myself, I find getting to the fundraising thing kind of a leap to at this moment. But are there specifics about the budget? Like when you look at the budget and they have laid out, you know, the expenses and everything, would you appreciate a run through of that right now so that we can... is that possible, Natalia, just to have a quick run through of that part of the report?
Sure, I'd turn that to Peter.
If you could put it
possible.
up there,
Yeah.
I could do that.
Let me just find it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a related question, certainly, because fundraising is, and on we're talking about an operational basis, is an important consideration in terms of the financing of the operations. And we have what could be a somewhat aggressive perspective on fundraising in terms of the annual raise. I think it's 80,000, or is it? Anyway, I'll wait for the figures to come up. But and that is linked to how it's operating. If it's seen as strictly a city, for example, if it's perceived as a city operation, and you know, why do we need to raise money for the city? Don't they raise taxes and pay for things? It would be more of a challenge to meet the revenue goals for fundraising. So these are the cost side I see you have there, which of course get into the these are the revenue. Okay.
The financial and usage assumptions. The first table there.
Yeah. So, but if you go, well, okay. I mean, just there is a cafe which gives us will be, you know, provide some margin. They'll have its costs and revenues, or just be rented out monthly, as in this case is shown. So the rental revenue is shown for that, and then the facility rentals. Obviously, you go into the usage occupancy rate factor, rental hours, and the revenues that accrue to that. That's about 75,000 a year. Facility rentals for education classrooms. It's another rental revenue estimate of 100,000. When it comes down to it. for flexible exhibition space. It's another chunk. Facility rentals for Black Box Theater. Of course, assumes you have a Black Box Theater, which is in the must-have category now. Another 50,000. Artist studios and maker spaces. It depends on whether that's in. If it's in, of course, it's another revenue source. Pottery, as said previously, kind of associated with that. An office anchor tenant, and that that's not a large item, but it's that, and the boardroom rental though for space for business is a fairly strong item in the rental side. These are all, of course, I mean, they're over a 5-year period. Generally, the estimates have not gone up too much over the years, but as the experience grows and if it's run well, it should be perhaps go up a little bit faster than that, but we want to be a bit conservative. Anyway, these are all based on looking at market rates in the city as well as experience elsewhere. This is the operating model, so you have you have the revenue from the cafe, from the rentals, office boardroom, rental revenue, sponsorships. Now, getting sponsorships and donations and fundraising, I would consider a realizable goal, but it's not just going to happen because you put it up there. And again, it comes to the point of how it's structured. It has to be. It assumes a strong community association and connection, and that is easier to build, perhaps, although more of a risk in terms of management to have the center run from a not-for-profit corporation, which the city helps finance, and maybe has an oversight of some capacity, and there's various models for that. But it rentals as it can give the authority more so to the community, and therefore if there's more of an investment in the community by the community, they can reach the donation figure more easily than if it was an extension of the city per se. That's the point that I wanted to make in terms of the fundraising assumptions in it. As to how you do fundraising and that kind of thing, that's a separate issue.
Thanks, Peter. Sorry to interrupt, but so basically, I mean, it follows that any of this planning for fundraising, budget, all of this comes down to what are those spaces and how are they being used, and that's got to come before you can really build that budget, know what fundraising thing, I'm thinking a fulsome discussion about that space usage, that building, what it's going to be, what it's going to function as, how it's going to connect with the community, will inform all of that. I mean, it's great to have potential numbers that, you can sort of predict in general terms based on kinds of usage. But for us at this point, if we're supposed to make a recommendation to city that includes specifically recommendations around fundraising and around governance and we can see based on what you just said how those things are all connected. Am I right in believing that we need to really focus as a group at this table on what the heck is in that building space-wise and how is it going to be used? Because that way we can determine what costs more accurately and what brings in money more accurately. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes and no. I think it's a really fair assessment in terms of it would be great if you would dig in and do that. And you would come up with, I'm sure, some modifications which would make you feel more comfortable about it. But the know part is you don't know until you're out there in the market. And the recommendation earlier, I think, was made, I forget who made it, was that the deals that you might think of striking now, or this is now we're into the real world, so to speak, and if there's a plan that's out there and you want to talk to one of the whole range of cultural activities, the leaders of them, the organizations, and say, now, okay, this is for real now. In 3 years, can you see yourself moving into it or using it, and so on? That's a next level of market research, as it were. We can go and say, what if, but if you're going ahead and you have to say, okay, well, I have to look at my budget. Can we move? Can we, in other communities, we've worked with, once the decision's made, work with the different organizations, say, you're going to up your game here, because what you're doing is fine for when you had a little hall, but now you've got a performance center that's much bigger than that. What can you get to double or triple your size in terms of your operating budget and your creative ambition? So in that sense, I think there will be a lot of shifts and changes. You won't be able to fix, by looking at it, taking a hard look at it now, you get a lot of ideas, but you won't be able to nail down precisely what's going to work best until you're engaging with the marketplace, so to speak, the creative marketplace.
Fair enough. Thank you. Okay, Pat?
Yes, our municipality has a current archive and has staffing and has overhead, has a budget to operate the current archive. Were those numbers included in these numbers that you have generated? That's part of the question. And the other part of the question is, I would assume that the 15 to 20,000 square feet of archival space in your description of the spaces is included in what your projected costs are, yet it is not at all revenue generating. Would that be correct?
That's a very good question. And I'm not sure if you, Natalia, would know that, because we don't have Caitlin with us to actually give
the model does assume city staffing will be running the center. Saw Rebecca raise her hand, so I'll let her finish on that part.
Thanks, Natalia. You got great eyes. Thanks. I think, Pat, it's a great question. And to your earlier discussion, I think one of the things that we could do with this chart, or Nodicity could do, would be to pull out what is a municipal service that's currently being offered. So we've been using the word archives, and yes, that's part of the discussion. Also artifacts, which also goes into the conversation around potential community use of that space for archival artifact services if they need them. So I think that in this budget, it would be great to reflect what is that archival artifact space that would be a city program that's sort of a behind the scenes piece, and pull that out from what would be the public facing, public programming component, because regardless of whether or not this cultural centre is going to be built, we have an archivist, we have a curator, we have those facilities that are existing expenses for the city. So if they are pulled out, included in here, because if it was to be part of this facility, it would be a cost associated with the facility, but it's not incremental, like what this entire discussion has been around is incremental servicing. Is that something we could do, Natalia?
I personally think that we need to have that information in front of us if we're including it in this feasibility study. So we really need to know what are the numbers currently to address our municipal archives and what services it's providing. I would say that when the Kawartha Lakes Arts Council did a needs assessment far earlier than the beginning of the feasibility study, across the board, almost every cultural organization that was included identified a need for better archival space for their collections. So I understand that we need to address the archive, but piggybacking the entire municipal archive responsibility into a cultural center is something we need to really seriously look at, and what parts of the municipal budget that are already existing would be brought forward to be included in these numbers.
That's a very good point. Thank you. Thank you.
If I can.
Absolutely, Mitchell.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to say I didn't mean my comments to make it sound as if an archive is incompatible with the center. So I hope that's not how it came off. I think that the archive is actually pretty important as a core piece to this kind of like hub and spoke idea, as it's been spoken about since early on. Like that people will be able to, or other organizations will be able to have that shared curatorial space. Their things kind of stored there and then possibly displayed, and then how that kind of activates those spaces outside of their like physical locations and gets people going to them, I think is an important part of the goals of the project. So I hope that doesn't get lost in the discussion.
Not at all. I think that, but thank you for restating that. I think Pat's point is very well taken, that we do need to know that information to really make sound decisions and any kind of recommendations. Thank you. Yes, Laurie.
Could you also add some inflation in your numbers? Is it too early to do that? But I noticed the costs are, I mean, insurance, let's face it, insurance is not going to stay the same over 5 years. I don't know if that's too much at this stage. The other question I had is, we had talked about memberships. I didn't know if that was a line item that you'd considered. That was on our tour. Some of them had members. And
that's another way of, I mean, just to take that point, it's another way of looking at fundraising as well, just through the membership model. But you're right. That's a very good tactic, and we can point it out as a component of it. But separating it out gets down to a level of operational detail that has some flexibility on. But we can certainly point that out. And just while I'm on it, before, so to speak, is that recall in the first phase that when we had a meeting with Curve Lake, they definitely want to consider that if there was an archival facility created, that they've got artifacts. They've got a ton of artifacts that they don't know where to put in a temporary way, or didn't at the time. So there would be another customer, so to speak, in that. And of course, if there's space in the facility existed, that would be very welcome to have them more part of the Kawartha Lakes community.
Follow up?
Sorry, just a quick question, not related to that statement. I noticed that there's a line item for an office anchor tenant, but earlier when we talked about what would be included, one of the probably wouldn't happen was office space. So it kind of gets back to what you were saying. We have to determine what is in the center before we can have a really concrete plan. But eventually those two will get closer together.
Yeah, it's really a matter of having that discussion with the other aspects in sort of the peripheral vision so that they're there while you're making the recommendations about the spaces themselves, isn't it? It's always one of those things. There's a bit of that. Any other thoughts right now? Tim?
Sure, I'm really excited by the net income line, because if you balance the archive staff and half the building administrative staff and some of the utilities and things, we're actually designing a space that's going to have a huge profit every year, which is kind of shocking at this point in the experiment. So that's kind of exciting to see, I'd say.
All right. Yes, Lori.
Well, speaking of profits, do we have to reflect the capital that's required to build this in our operating budget? Is there any payback?
That's a very good question too, because in my mind, there's two very separate things. There's the building and the operational aspects of this, and how they connect is going to be a vital thing, right? To plan the moving forward part. So that's a good question. Does anybody have an answer for that?
Well, it may be better for phase 3. Let's face it, we're not going to have a detailed budget until phase 4. But we should be able to inform council with plus or minus where we're headed. But that payback, I'm not sure how that works. I would expect there'd be some kind of repayment schedule.
Does anyone have knowledge about that? Because, or where would we find knowledge about that?
I would say...
sorry, Pat, just a sec. Sorry. I think Rebecca might have an answer there.
I'd say from the city side, I think we will identify what the construction budget is and then what the operating budget is, and then we can bring in our treasurer to talk around what that would look like. But that's what they're going to be wanting to see two different components of.
And I'm just going to add to that. So when we do move forward, we always do them as two separate reports. One is capital and one is operating. So that would be the only way probably to have a better look at the entire group. So I think that's a suggestion that we should look at.
Pat.
Oh, there we go. In past experience with community projects on municipal properties and being involved with the fundraising as well as implementation of those projects, the goal would be to have fully funded construction, and at the end of that phase, we have a municipal asset that is not presenting a debt. So in this case, we're looking at having some municipal budget already set aside in the long-term budget, but through a myriad of possibilities of contributing arts funds and public input, the goal would be to have a facility built without debt.
Councillor Richardson says, yeah. Yeah. All right. Other thoughts, questions, information that we can provide these people as they move forward on our behalf? Okay, so I'm going to throw this out there. For us, next steps, right? In my mind, and I throw this out there for discussion amongst you folks, and these folks maybe can give us some guidance. I think that it would be very useful for us as a task force to sort of break this down into specific chapters and deal with them one at a time, with the understanding the others will inform and they'll come into the discussion. But for instance, the one chapter being very specific about space usage, partners, how we see this as being a useful and viable operation. And if we can have that discussion as a group, then take that and think, okay, budget. How does that work? I'm talking operating budget. How does that work? And have a fulsome discussion about using the numbers that have been provided already. We can use that based on what we see the space is being used for and sort of move forward and then have a discussion about the fundraising aspect and a discussion about the governance, because those things are all big topics. They really, really are. And we sort of pick away at them, little bits and pieces, as we get information. But every time we pick away at them, it brings other questions up. And I think as a group, it would be good for us, and I'm just throwing this out there for your comments, but it would be good for us to focus specifically, have a meeting and say, okay, we're going to talk about the space usage. And, because there's been a million concerns and questions and ideas. And for us to come to an agreement about what we see so that we can say to the city, this is what we see based on all this information these people have given us. This is our recommendation, and then move on. I throw that out there. Comments, Christina?
Can I just clarify when fundraising is used, are we talking specifically, we're looking at the capital fundraising, or because we're also looking at an operating budget, are we looking at the operating fundraising, or like what's our first priority, and so that we can kind of focus on that?
That's a very good question. I don't know. I mean, specifically, I can't give you the exact answer. Where should we focus that?
Oh, sorry. For our purposes, we're looking at building an operating model. So we'd like, recommendations on fundraising from that piece of things. But Peter might have other thoughts too.
Well, you're right. It is capital and operating, and I don't know whether you should focus. You should be realistic about what you can do in operating, but your first focus of the day is to have a solid assessment of what you could get from capital, so that when you go to council, you say, we really looked at this and we think, if this is going to cost X million, we can raise over a 2-year period if we have professional doing it. We've got, figure that out, 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever million you want to put in there. I'm just putting those numbers out. But there's also becoming as part of this, the debt repayment part. I think Pat has got it right to saying you're fully funded, let's go, is the ideal. It may not be as feasible in the future. You might resort to something which is now becoming more viewed and looked at by the arts community as social finance. And that is taking the money that companies and individuals and foundations invest to keep up the revenues, to keep them going, family foundations and so on. And they have that as an investment, which would be repayable, but mixed with other grants and so on could be a finishing touch and vital part of it. Without getting into it anymore, it's just that there's other, I'm just making the point that there's the whole capitalization of it is a project in itself, if you like, to take a look at, including the fundraising part of it, which triggers then more likelihood, if you can get a reasonable figure for that, of getting other funds, including social finance, but including obviously grants and that. But the grants are going to become, as we know, it's not that becoming scarcer, there's just more mouths to feed, as arts organizations and community centers and so on have faced a lot of challenges and cost rising and lower attendance and that kind of thing.
Thanks, Peter. We have a follow-up question.
And not so much a question as just something to keep in mind. When we're starting to think in terms of governance models, if we're looking at a nonprofit being established in order to be able to run this versus the municipal side of things, we need to be factoring in some granting organizations. You need to have at least 1 year from incorporation, and then your ask amount is dependent on your revenue levels. So when we're looking at revenue and potential for grants, I can't speak for all granting organizations, but one I'm very familiar with, so you would need to have some time before you would actually be even eligible to apply. So just something to just keep in mind when we're thinking about those first couple of years and how that governance model may be impacted by with grants.
Thank you. That's good. That's very good. Any other comments, thoughts? Any moving forward ideas, Lori?
Great points. I think we really need a governance discussion, because is it a nonprofit or is it a charity? If it's a charity and you offer tax receipts, you're getting into larger donations, you're getting into sponsorship dollars. So if it's a nonprofit, you will be forever plagued with smaller donations. So I think there's a larger conversation. I don't know if that's in phase 2 or in phase 3, but something to keep in mind.
I believe that's in phase 2. Yeah.
I like to think of things in terms of for-profit.
Charities are allowed to make profit so long as they are further the charitable purpose. So just know that there's lots for profit in a charity.
Thank you. We'll look for your direction. I know in your position as a manager of the Kawartha Lakes Community Foundations that we'll be soliciting your help in the future.
Okay, I'm mindful of the time. It's 11:10 there, and so we have 20 minutes till we run out of time. Is there anything that folks around the table specifically want to make sure our friends on the screen are aware of, or before we let them go, so that they can go and move on? Lori?
Sorry. If I could have the spreadsheets, when we get into the operating revenue and expenses, it'd be very helpful for the spreadsheet, just so that I can understand how you're calculating your occupancy rate and see the formulas. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect, thank you. And Pat?
My comment is not about the content of the presentation, but somewhat the wording. And I'm sure before the final draft is put together, you'll carefully go through it. And I won't go specifically word by word, but I'm looking at page 11, and in the third paragraph, it talks about a cultural center could be a transformative infrastructure for the municipality if used as a vehicle through which to administer additional innovative program. I would like to see words like administer changed to promote, or in the line following it, providing a space to allow local artists and artisans, performers, but to encourage local artisans. Maybe words don't seem like they have that much impact, but in my reading through, some words like that, I think the intent is that this is a very positive community-based facility, and we don't need words like allow and administer.
Words well taken. Thank you. Tim?
I'd like it if we were provided with the raw data from the survey as well.
For sure. I don't have the raw data, nor does he received yet, I think, collated data from the city.
I think Donna can speak to that, Tim.
Through you, Chair, is that you're talking about the one that was done on Jump In?
I'm speaking to whatever they're referencing in here.
Like the 218 responses, that one?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so that was done on Jump In. So we are working right now to get it posted back on Jump In. Okay. And it'll have all of the, like it has the bar graph. It'll say, 17 people said this and 22 people said this and that type of thing. And then at the end, it has all the comments that were provided as well. We can't provide personal data, like we can't say who said that, but we can provide what they said and that kind of thing. It's going to be posted on Jump In shortly.
Yeah, and I'd like to be able to look deeper than that with, obviously, with personal information redacted, but if we're saying 57% of respondents are interested in art classes and workshops, I think that is also representative of 2/3 of the survey coming back from people who work in those fields. And I'd just like to be able to look more specifically at the actual data that's given there.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Tim, are you looking for like the Excel, like that data to come in Excel so you can manipulate the data to review it? I think we can do that with the task force. Yeah.
That'd be great. I don't need personal information. I just want to be able to see how sectorally people are answering questions, because it will relate more to the outcomes of those spaces and things. What the amount of space an artist requires to paint versus what a theater company requires to do a show or rehearse a show are very different things. But if each of those are one respondent, then we just need to be able to square that in our minds, and we're not going to get that from just a series of bar graphs.
And that was included in the ask. Like, one of the very first questions was, are you an blah, 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 or other? And then people were supposed to put in, like, there was others for each question. So I think that can be pulled. Yeah.
Wonderful. That's good question. Okay, well, I would just ask, is there what? Oh, I see. Sorry, Peter has his hand up there. Peter?
Well, only on the survey. I mean, the survey is self-identified people who responded to it, who are obviously interested in it to respond. But how representative it is of the population is not. You can't make it. If you have 17% to say one thing, it doesn't mean 17% of people who are the likes think that, or even of that. Those, if it's like if they're all one gender or another, it isn't representative. So I just take the results. I think it's a good idea to analyze and see if 20 responses were in some particular artistic area, and see what they wanted. That could be useful, but it's kind of an indication as opposed to a specific chunk of the population. I just want to be aware of the sampling of it, because it isn't selected sample; it's a self-identified sample. We just want to make sure that clients know that when we do those surveys.
Good to know. Thank you. Yeah, that's very useful. So I just would ask you folks, moving forward from here, what is the next step for you and us?
Well, we're going to take your feedback today and update this report. Like I mentioned, the programming kind of chart there. We're hoping to have just one last go at it. Hopefully we can really nail in the details of the usage of the spaces, to your point about how that impacts, of course, governance and operating models and all of that on our part. So that's why that stuff was left a little bit higher level in this first findings piece of it. So yeah, if there's any further comments or thoughts on that you could share with us. After that point, we're hoping to wrap up that piece of it by the end of July. So not too long from now, if we could, have some thoughts from you guys on that. But we heard a lot today. It's a lot to run with. Of course, we've got comments from the city as well that we're working with. But yeah, if anything else comes to mind, we'd be happy to hear it.
Thank you. Okay, so we will send you whatever other thoughts come to us as a group, and make sure that you have those moving forward. Thank you very much. It was great to read this report and see the recommendations that were there. I think it's a very useful tool for us as we move forward too. So thank you very, very much to you folks for doing that and for being here today on behalf of all of us. And we hope you have a lovely long weekend.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that said, folks, I would ask, I actually slipped up earlier, and I'll get back to correcting that in a moment, but if I could have somebody put a motion forward to accept that particular report from the consultants. Pat has put that forward, and may I have a seconder? Anybody? Christina, thank you. All those in favor of accepting the report? Thank you very much. And to correct my earlier error, I never did that exact same process when poor Rebecca did her report earlier on the Green Fund. So I'm sorry. That's what it is when you go that long between meetings. That's what I'll say. So if I can have someone put a motion forward to accept Rebecca's. Thank you, Lori, and Christina seconded that. All in favor? The hands are up. There we go. My apologies for that. So we have just a few minutes. I would love to just hear what you're thinking about going forward, because they're looking at the end of July to sort of refine things. I think there's a whole lot of, this is just me, I think there's a whole lot of things that we could refine and send to them as thoughts. Yes, Rebecca.
Just to jump in, Chair, that refining and those thoughts, I'd say if this task force, that'd be a great conversation to have as a group in a meeting. And so if we need to, the next task force meeting that was sort of planned for you guys was in September, but if that needs to move earlier, we can do that. Also, if we should be asking the consultants to push back their July date and negotiate a later time for that last report to come in so that you can have that time to discuss as a task force, still keeping that the goal of going to council with recommendations in November. This is a pretty important conversation to have, so we could do either of those things, whatever it is that you need.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's good. The challenge is, I think we're at the point right now with that particular report to probably have the biggest impact actually on putting our thoughts out there and having a discussion at this table in a meeting, and then moving it forward. What are your thoughts, Tim?
Somebody smart about these things can tell. Can we have a working group? Can we have a session, not a meeting?
Rebecca Mustard is looking at me right now. Yes, we can have a working group meeting.
I think that would be the most useful of all ways to approach it, I think. So how do we arrange that? And I mean, it's, I think, very important, but also mindful. Summer is like the craziest time in the entire world to get people together. So, but how do we do it? Just the process. Donna?
Do you want me to take that one too? No, we can officially just make a note to the clerk's office saying that regarding within the terms of reference that we do want to have a breakout working group session. So we just need to find a date and go forward, right?
I think whenever we do that to Tim's point of the data breakdown would be super helpful. And then also when Natalia was talking about the sort of groups that they've contacted, so just make sure that who are we engaging with, that we're getting that sort of value add from every possible person that we could get that from. And if we are missing someone or a group or something, to make sure that we're really connecting in that way so that all the recommendations and advising that we're doing is really community focused, and that we are getting that working session to discuss it further and make sure that the task force is really being a task force and being the best that it can possibly be, and using the skill sets of everybody in the best way.
Agreed.
Christina,
get right to you.
Just going to suggest that maybe a couple dates could be provided, and we have a poll about which ones might work, because speaking to your point about the summer being busy and people being away and whatnot, although Zoom will help if there is people away, but just if we could do that, that'd be great.
Donna, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, through you. I'm just curious, when we had task force during the pandemic, were there working group sessions? Like, can we do like a town hall type working group session? Or like, I'm just trying to figure out how, like the structure, like after what Darcy was just saying there, like when the parking strategy was happening, I'm not sure what type of oversight there was for that, but they did have people come in and talk, like sort of take this to, and can we, that's why I said I'm actually asking a question here.
Well, are you talking about opening up to a public forum?
No, I was sort of just taking the data from the survey, the people who were interviewed, you know, your various circles, like, you know, doing, like figuring out that type of thing. And then, so like a 20-person meeting, not a 8-person meeting. Like, so having those extensions, but I don't know if that's what you guys are asking or not. I'm just curious if we can do that.
I think you guys are just we'd want to dial down what we have around this table, right? Just based on the additional information. So that, to me, is this prescribed working group from this meeting. And that's, okay, I think, where you need to focus.
Okay. Yeah, I just wasn't sure after what Darcy said about the interviewees and missing people. I didn't know if she meant taking it out, and then I didn't know if we could take it out.
I just mean that, yeah, the sort of large buckets and headings that, like, each of these things are sort of listed, and then what is contained within that, what's happened in the past, what's happening now, what's projected for the future, and are we making sure that we're just covering all of those bases? And specifically, if it is supposed to be the community that's using this and the creative community that's accessing it, that we're making sure that we're connecting. That's all.
Pat.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that to make sure we're not breaking any rules, that the members of the task force can gather in a not necessarily municipal facility, but gather to discuss what we have in front of us. Is that something we can do or can't do?
No, we can't do that. That's a procedural bylaw that we can't break. So we have to keep it like right across, like closed door meetings or whatnot is just not looking like it's transparent, and we just don't want to go through that optic.
I'm not suggesting closed door.
No, but I'm just saying it would be a procedural bylaw that we can't break.
Then what would be the description of how we would gather and have a discussion amongst the task force members?
It's a breakout right from like here, right? We've got information, we're doing our homework, we've asked for some additional information from our consultants and staff, and we have that prior, and we get down to the nitty gritty and really hash out some details that we need to fine tune, I think.
But can we have that in a meeting room here with a whiteboard instead of pressing a button and responding each time? Like what I really need is just a flowing conversation with a whiteboard and consensus and alignment. Is that the definition of what you're suggesting?
No, but let us do our homework first, okay? I'm not going to confirm right now. There seems to be just too much going around and too many different ideas. I know, Tim, you're frustrated, but I'm sorry, but I've got to toe the city line as well, so.
It's a matter of just fitting together a couple different worlds here, right? And no, but I mean, I've lived in both of these worlds a whole lot. And the reality is we have the ideas and the focus on the goal. Other people within the structure that are going to help us get there see all of these obstacles between here and the goal. We're focused on the goal. But the reality is, for the sake of the many people who pay taxes, we have to go through this process to get there. That's the reality. We do need a working group situation, though, where the people at this table can have a truly valid discussion, an honest, valid discussion, and get their thoughts. That's why they're here. So we'll find a way to make that happen. I hear the city people are on our side and are going to help us make that happen. I feel that strongly. So we'll find out how, and we'll float a couple dates and make sure that we do what Christina said, take a poll and find out what is going to be most useful to us, and we will make a meeting happen. And everybody will come prepared. I, for one, would like to have very specific focus on even just 2 of those major topics, so that we come prepared with our thoughts about those things. And if the other things feed in, that's great, but let's see if we can come to some concrete understandings in just 2. And so I would ask, what do you see as the 2 most important things that we should be prepared to talk on? I'm asking you, Lori.
You said it best in the beginning. What does this cultural center hold? Can we confirm that and get aligned on that? Maybe put to bed the archive versus artistic center and have a good, rich conversation about that. We would need some budgetary information on the archive and how much expense might be relieved by having an archive and how much revenue, all that sort of information to help that discussion. That would be really just one big session. Okay.
Okay. Everybody feel okay about that? And it's, I'll tell you, I every time we have a meeting, I read the terms of reference because I'm always trying to be mindful of what we're doing. And earlier, I think was it Tim, or no, Pat, about wording. You were talking about wording. And this paragraph, this is what I'm saying about staying focused on the vision of it happening. This study represents a critical step in determining the feasibility of advancing the vision and concept of a cultural center. How many layers can be put in front of moving one step forward? I understand it. It's a very frustrating thing. And each one of those words is meant to put a little bit of space between the commitment to the reality. But the reality is that we are here and we bring stuff to this table, and we will put it on the table when we get together. So Donna and I will be in touch with some dates, and let's see what we can do to come up with a good discussion there. Any final thoughts? All right. And that's, I think, takes care of the agenda. Am I right?
Just a motion to adjourn.
Just a motion to adjourn. It is 11:31. Tim and Christina, all those in favor, thank you very, very much. I think there was a lot of good stuff came out of that discussion.